Now to visit Barbara and Phil Leitner's garden in Orinda. The Leitners have a mature local native plant garden. This garden has a meadow in a sunny area. It's bordered by mature oaks and an oak woodland understory. They have seen 43 species of birds in or above their garden. On the green home front, the Leitners have a plug-in hybrid car, solar panels, and more recently they installed a heat pump for whole house heating and cooling. Barbara notes that one of their most cost-effective actions has been to ensure their house was adequately insulated. To that end, they added attic insulation. They recently replaced their windows with more energy-saving dual-pane windows, and they had an energy audit to detect air leaks. You can ask them about any of their green home features. Barbara Leitner's very welcoming porch. This is a native grape arbor that's over the porch. In the video, you can see that it had lost its leaves, but this is what it looks like when it's in fully leafed out. And you can see her native grasses at the bottom and some ferns. And this is sitting on the porch. This was taken some years ago, but looking out at the street and her garden, which was new at that time. So we'd like to thank our sponsor, Native Here Nursery, which grows locally native plants in Alameda and Contra Costa counties, for supporting the tour. Native Here is an all-volunteer project of the California Native Plant Society's East Bay chapter. It's dedicated to growing plants from ethically collected seed and cuttings from Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And this is so interesting because it's the only place that you can go to buy plants that are locally native to Alameda and Contra Costa counties. You can go there and look by area and find a plant that really came from Berkeley or Walnut Creek or the Fremont area or El Sprante, and really to be restoring locally, genetically local species to our areas. You can visit Native Here online at nativeherenursery.org for information about gardening with local native plants, order plants for curbside pickup, or learn what hours you can shop in person. You can contact them through their website or call 510-549-0211 with questions or to volunteer. And I know that our upcoming host, Barbara, has been an active volunteer with Native Here Nursery for a long time. We'd like to thank professional videographer Rachel Steyer for volunteering to make the video of Barbara Leitner's garden that we're about to see. If you know how to make videos and can volunteer to make a video of a garden for next year's tour, I hope you'll email us. We'd love to introduce you to a native plant gardener near your home and feature your work in the 2024 tour. And we're so grateful to Rachel for helping us when we needed it. Now we'll bring on Barbara. Welcome, Barbara, to the tour.
Hi, I'm Barbara Leitner. Welcome to my garden. This garden is a celebration of native plants in the San Pablo Creek Watershed, Contra Costa County, California. It's a small watershed, but there's a lot of biodiversity here. The goal of my garden was to celebrate the native plant diversity of my watershed, San Pablo Creek, and to celebrate it in a pleasing arrangement. San Pablo Creek is not a large watershed. It drains into the North San Francisco Bay. It's 41 square miles. So choosing plants exclusively from the watershed, I've been told, was a limited palette, but there must be a couple dozen tree species, and there must be several dozen shrub species, and probably a couple hundred herbs of various kinds, and grasses. That seems like plenty to me because this is just a small garden. It's 100 feet by 40 feet maybe, the front yard. In the course of gardening, one can put more plants into a small space than grow in nature. That's one of the pleasures of gardening, and a special privilege too. So the garden was never intended to be a restoration project. It was never intended to be just the plants that would grow on this spot of land back 300 years ago. It's just an opportunity to, for me to enjoy and get to know better these couple of dozen native plant species that grow around where I live. And of course that has benefits to wildlife. I'm a little oasis of native plants in a suburban neighborhood. So we moved in '94. The first major redesign was quite a bit later. It was in 2007. So the whole lower level was lawn, and there were these tortured, box shrubs that were right up against the house, those lollipop-looking shrubs. And the area above that low retaining wall was the 50s veg of choice, juniper, that low-growing juniper stuff that rats love. And within that was a deciduous kind of magnolia tree, which was quite pretty. Over close to the driveway, there was a beautiful, large blue spruce, which is, that's like a northern forest kind of species. So obviously it needed a great deal of care to live in this dry, sunny climate. The landscape architect I worked with is named David Bigham. He works in the East Bay and he specializes in native plant gardens. It was a great pleasure and honor to work with him. Even though I might be more familiar than many with the native plants around here, arranging them in a pleasing and practical way is beyond my knowledge and skill. So I was very happy to work with a trained person. He designed this garden with an eye to viewpoints. That is, where would a typical observer stand and look at the sweep of vegetation, and how can that vegetation be arranged in a pleasing way? He also, just in general, had a sort of sweep of size and texture and so on from the house to the street. The largest vegetation is out by the street. Then there's a strip of moderate to fairly large shrubs that also follow a sort of a strip away from the house. And then bordering that was a medium-sized row of shrubs and then some tall grasses. And then coming in closer to the house was this herb and grass dominated meadow. He also gave me this area that he called Big Bird, which we refer to as the triangle, but it's at one end of the meadow, and from most places where humans would see it, it's kind of like, oh, there's something else different down there. Let's go take a look. So we'll talk about some different zones in the garden that have different plantings. They were put together with the idea of plants that will do well in those conditions. But I'm going to start farthest from the house and come in closer to the house. So we'll start with the parking strip. The row of decorative rocks were put in quite some time ago, just created a little bit of a boundary, and they've been a lot of fun. We live just a couple of doors away and across the street from an elementary school. You just wouldn't believe how many kids found it irresistible to hop along those rocks on their way to school. They liked it. I don't see too much of that now, but we get more interest from passing dogs now because we seem to encourage so much wildlife that this is a place to stop and kind of see what's going on. Our neighbors also tell us that we have a lot of birds. What I'd like to say to them is, you can do this too. On the outer side of the rocks is some Douglas iris. That's Iris Douglassiana. That was just an extra addition. It wasn't part of the garden design, but it was a shady place, and irises like a little shade. So I just tucked them in next to some of the larger rocks, and they seem to be pretty happy there. On the inside of the rocks is a row, in the shadier places, a row of redberry, Rhamnus crocea, which is a plant that it can get to be a large-ish shrub, but it's very finely textured leaves and has remained fairly small in this under these site conditions. Also in there were some plants that were put in when it was a sunnier place. some California sage, Artemisia californica. Artemisia californica and the monkey flower, Mimulus, have done okay, but more so in the sunnier parts of that strip. So that's fine. We have happier red berry in certain shady places and happier California sage and monkey flower in the sunnier places. And that's fine. They both produce an effect of a sort of medium-sized shrub. Just in the interior from that, I'm working on trying to develop a very definite strip of what's known as yampa. That's the common name, Peridoridia callagii. That's an herbaceous perennial in the carrot family. It's a host plant, larval food plant, shall I say, for the Anis swallowtail butterfly. So in order to get a population of Anis swallowtails here, I'm going to need an awful lot of Peridoridia. But it's a pleasant plant. It goes dormant. It's really dormant for much of the year. Here in March, it's just beginning to show. So my hope is I'm going to have hundreds of them, and maybe some butterflies too. So back in the days when the parking strip was very sunny, I had a little fun with something else. California fuchsia is a great summer plant because it flowers so late. The hummingbirds love it. It likes the sun. It likes rocks. If you find it in nature, it's almost always in sunny rocks. And so I tried planting some of that. It was very happy and continues to do well where it's sunny. So another success story and a lot of fun. So interior from that is what I'm going to call the shrub and tree area. And it's quite a variety of plantings, but the idea is that this is the tallest and kind of woodiest section of the garden. In effect, it's the farthest from the house. These trees don't really interact with the house, or they create their own shade and so on, but they're out a little ways from the house, which is just fine. You'd like to have a little sun close in. That strip includes several coast live oaks that are true volunteers. I haven't planted any of them, actually. There's no need to plant coast live oaks in my garden. They'll show up on their own. In fall of 2022, there was what they call a big mast year, which is a year when acorns are produced in great quantities. We have literally hundreds of seedlings at this moment, more than we need. This is perfect site conditions for coast live oaks, and it's a matter of refereeing more than encouraging those species. Also in this strip is a valley oak, Quercus lobata. It's been pretty happy with site conditions here. Valley oaks like deeper soils. They can tolerate a fair amount of moisture in their soils, and sometimes they'll grow in pretty deep clay. Also in that strip are the toyons, Heteromeles arbustifolia. They volunteer here. We planted a bunch of them, but they volunteer. They're unfortunately they are vulnerable to sudden oak death, and they sometimes are a little hard to find in the nursery trade because of that. But they're doing fine here, and I like them because they produce a little filter, visual filter from the road. But we live on a quiet street, so we don't want a hedge. We want something where we can wave at the neighbors as they walk by. A few toyon here and there provides a little screen, but it doesn't say keep out. We love our privacy. It says hi neighbor. Also in that area are some coffee berries, Frangula californica. Those are a little smaller and more delicate. Coffee berries are just such a wonderful shrub. They're beautiful. Their leaves are nice. They encourage all kinds of native bees. I wish I had a little more of them, actually. But also in that area, let's see, on the side yard, we threw in a few wood roses. That'd be Rosa gymnocarpa over on the side yard. I intended to have California rose, Rosa californica, in this area. And I discovered that, unfortunately, I had a misidentified rose, which was not native. So I have spent the last few years assiduously digging up these roses, which are quite persistent. When I'm sure I've got them all, then I will reintroduce, or shall I say introduce, Rosa californica back to where it belongs in the garden. Okay, so there are a few other things that I have experimented with there with varying degrees of success. I had a silver bush lupin in the general vicinity that did very beautifully for maybe 10 years. It was just a stunning plant. And then it got old and it left us. Some of its offspring are now planted in that area, and they're not quite as happy because they're in a little bit shadier place than they'd really like, but it's a beautiful shrub, Lupinus albifrons. I'm also experimenting in certain shady places with fuchsia flowered gooseberry, a little bit of Ribes menziesii, that's canyon gooseberry. Any kind of shrub that's about that same size and likes some filtered shade would be fair game for me. I get to experiment there with lots of things. I also experimented with something that seems to be doing quite well, Symphyotrichum chilense, which is California aster, which is it's an herbaceous perennial that kind of grows by runners. It seems to be doing fine. One of the things that I often look for, if I can, are plants that produce some summer flowering, some summer color, because native plant gardens can look quite stunningly floriferous in springtime and then become rather quiet and uneventful later on in the summer. California aster flowers late, so I was attracted to that. Douglas Iris douglassiana. It likes some dry shade, and everybody wants to know what to plant under coast live oaks. The answer is often Douglas iris. It's just a great plant. Mine's been in there for a while, and if I wanted it to flower more, I should divide it, and that'll stimulate its growth. Very satisfying early spring flower. Check that. Coast live oaks you see in the front of the garden, those are actually seedlings that became evident to us when we removed all the juniper 16 years ago. So those trees are between 16 and 20 years old. They don't get any extra water to speak of. So they're just doing what oak trees do. Jays are famous for moving acorns around. There are native oak trees not far from here, because there's a little stream, it's a tributary to San Pablo Creek that's within flying distance for a jay, a short hop, shall we say. So they certainly could have come from there. Coast live oaks are so well suited to this area. They pop up in people's yards, and without a great deal of argument, they persist. And some of them actually, there's some large old ones that probably were there when the house was built and somebody decided to leave them in place because, it's a nice big tree. I'm fully confident that those are local genetic stock, full volunteers in the sense that nothing was done to encourage them, facilitate them, plant them. They just arrived. So the next zone, I'm going to call it the tall grass strip. And this is something that's going to be shrubs and grasses that are not as tall as the tree and shrub strip. But because it's not as tall, it's also a little denser in terms of its sort of visual kind of effect. It's a lot of plants that are densely planted together and gives you this real kind of natural division between different zones where the ecological requirements are different and the species are completely different. In this strip, there's a row of snowberry, Symphorocarpus albus. I just prune it down to about 1.5 feet every year, and it grows up a little taller, but it's a dense little strip that just says, okay, we're getting into another zone of plants here. It'll grow another 1.5 feet during the season. Right next to that is a double row of California fescue, Festuca californica, which I have to say it's a great garden plant. It's big, it's well behaved, it's a nice definite clump. The flower stems will get to be 4 feet tall. It's really quite a stunning plant, and it often has this kind of gray green foliage too, almost a kind of a bluish color that I think is really quite pretty. Also in that strip are a couple of tall herbs, soap plant, Chlorogulum pomeridianum, one of the plants that grows like crazy in my garden. Another is milkweed, Asclepias fascicularis, which also kind of tends to get out of bounds a little bit, but that's the host plant for the monarch butterfly. And if what it took was to have 1,000 Asclepias here, milkweeds, I would do it so I could get the monarchs. I don't have monarchs yet. And then I've been experimenting with some other plants in that zone. I've tried coyote mint, Monardella villosa. It's done okay. I think it likes it a little sunnier and probably a little kind of rockier and better drained than most of my garden. It's an enjoyable but not overpowering addition to the garden. And then something else that I've been experimenting with is gum plant, Grindelia camporum. That's something that does pretty well in these site conditions. And when it did well, I harvested a bunch of seed, gave it to the nursery. They grew a whole bunch more, and I planted a whole lot more out there because why not go with success? This row is also has a little bit of a grassy section where I'm encouraging things like purple needlegrass, which is the taller of the two needlegrass species I've got here. That's Stipa pulchra. So then we move downslope slightly to the kind of topographically the lowest part of the garden, which is the meadow. This is a place that is just a profusion and a complexity that you might find in a native meadow. I'm experimenting with a lot of species that might or might not grow here in these exact site conditions, but it's still fun to give them a try. So the predominant species in the meadow is foothill needlegrass, Stipa lepida, and I have encouraged that over Stipa pulchra, the purple needlegrass, because it's a little finer textured and just is more in scale with my garden. I don't have a very large space. Keeping things in proportion is important to me. We also have in the meadow deerbed sedge, Carex praegracillus. Let's see some of the herbaceous perennials we have here. Blackroot sanicle, or Pacific sanicle, Sanicula crassicalis. That seems to do better in the shadier spots. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. That seems to kind of grow in patches all over the garden. The meadow is a place where I do experiment with annuals as I can. I've had some sort of moderate success with some Clarkias. Let's see, with some tarweeds, both Media and Holocarpa. We have a bird bath in the meadow. That is a very popular with our birds. Come to visit the feeders and take a bath. Because it's a body of still water, we have to clean it out periodically. So we've created a little wet spot right under the bird bath that is too wet for most of our meadow species. So I planted a riparian herb under there, Verbena lasiostaches. Verbena is the common name. It seems to be doing just fine. It likes it. It likes the soil, just a little wet all the time. It's a great bee plant. It has little tiny purple flowers that flower for months. That's been a fun experiment. There's a little bit of Iris douglassiana in the meadow. More soap plant than I really need. Some milkweed, Asclepias, in the meadow. Really, as long as it's fairly well behaved, almost any kind of herb is fine with me. Oh, there's a little California poppy there too, a Schultzia californica. The meadow is also home for blue-eyed grass, which is just a delightful little perennial herb in the iris families, Cicerynchium bellum. Another perennial that does okay in the meadow, sometimes to my surprise and gratification, is the California fuchsia, Epilobium canum. It's a little richer, less well-drained soil than it usually grows in, but it seems to do okay there, and I couldn't be happier. I'm also experimenting with something in a part of the meadow that is rather shady, tends to be a little moist, and that is something called self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. That's something that's rather uncommon in the East Bay. I only know of a couple of spots for it. It's a very well-behaved ground cover in the mint family and produces little deep purple spikes of flowers over a long period of time. My self-heal winked out during the drought, so I reintroduced it a little bit, but it's a lovely ground cover, and I think a little underappreciated. So let's see, the triangle. The triangle is just a patch, a tangle, if you will, of trees and shrubs and herbs kind of have created their own habitat. It's all just as sunny as the meadow, but we planted in some some buckeye, Aesculus californica, which is a beautiful kind of architectural tree. It can be pruned as a tall shrub if you like. It's a multi-stemmed tree, and it goes dormant in the summertime. So for many months of the year, you see it as just a light-colored, bare-stemmed, branching, multi-stemmed kind of small tree. A small tree is a good selection because it's fairly close to the house, and you don't want something real big there. So that's really what has created most of the structure, and also creates a little bit of the shade that some of these other species are going to benefit from. Another tall plant in that area is blue elderberry, Sambucus nigra. Most of what's in the triangle is not represented elsewhere in the garden, but it has, over time in particular, it's really established its own kind of habitat because of the presence of these buckeyes primarily, and also to some extent the blue elderberry, Sambucus nigra, variety Cerulean. And those are tall, deciduous, shrub-like or small tree species, and they seem to be doing just fine. They get a little shade from the house structure, which probably helps them a little bit, and then they in turn provide some shade for some of the other plants. The triangle is surrounded by California fescue, Festuca californica. Within the triangle, California hazelnut, Corylus cornuta, variety californica. That's getting to be a tall shrub, but it was slow growing at the beginning. It's a special interest to me. It's actually used traditionally as a basket weaving plant. It was managed, as so much of California was, by burning, so that the top stems might die back, and then new stems would grow from the base long and straight, which is a process called coppicing. The hazelnut stems, these long straight stems, are also quite flexible, and so they were used as rims on baskets. Mine are not treated that way, so they're just big bushy shrubs. But that's another one of the larger plants out there. There's also, within there is chaparral honeysuckle, which is Lonicera hispidula. And that's just a clambering shrub with lovely honeysuckle flowers that flower over a long period of time. Kind of a exuberant plant out there, covers a lot of ground. Also in there is cow parsnip, Heracleum maximum, which is a very large herbaceous perennial, grows to 6 or 7 feet tall. Also in the triangle is another herbaceous perennial, mugwort, Artemisia douglassiana. That's another plant that just grows up. It's a very satisfying plant. It gets to be 3 feet tall maybe, dies back in the winter, and you just give it a haircut down at ground level, and up it comes the next year. And then we have a little bit of common rush, Juncus effusus, in that area. I'm also experimenting with California pipevine, Aristolochia californica, which I would be delighted if that took over a much larger patch than where it is right now. It's a small shrub, and my hope is it's just spending the first couple of years post-planting getting its roots established. It's the larval food plant for the California pipevine swallowtail, which is a much beloved and stunning butterfly. So if we're able to get enough food plant here to support a little bit of pipevine swallowtail butterfly, that would be a great accomplishment for this garden. And then the last zone here in my garden is the area that's the shady part next to the house. And that includes several different beds and situations. It includes a lot of sword ferns, Polisticum munitum. Some of those actually are plants that have been there since before we moved here. So the sword ferns themselves are probably 40 or 50 years old. Some of them have been divided and moved around a little bit. It's a testament to how popular they are in a garden. They provide year-round green foliage. They're very well behaved. They get to be a certain size and no larger. They put on beautiful new growth about this time of year. There's everything to like about them. One thing I've been told is that they also are the only place where Swainson's thrushes will nest is in the old growth of sword ferns. I wish I had the old growth to supply for the Swainson's thrushes, but in my garden I'm afraid I I feel moved to keep everything tidied up enough that I probably will never have Swainson's thrushes nesting in my sword ferns. But they're a beautiful plant. Some other things that grow in this area, I'm experimenting with some ocean spray, Holodiscus discolor, which is a plant that loves shady canyons, so I'm figuring this might be a good spot. We have some wild ginger, Asarum caudatum, which is a beautiful, fragrant ground cover, very well behaved. Its native habitat is in redwood forest. It's a perennial, very low growing plant with kind of glossy, large, heart-shaped leaves. Quite beautiful. Also in the shady part of the garden is silk castle, Garrya elliptica, which is a very, very large shrub. I planted it in a place where if it's necessary to take out a coastline oak, which is way too close to the house, the Garrya will be of a size that it can just take over and cover a portion of the house that's not very interesting. Also in this area is Slim Solomon's seal, Meanthemum stellatum, which is a herbaceous perennial ground cover. It goes dormant in the summer, so to me it's not quite as attractive as the wild ginger, but it also grows in a much broader sort of ecological range, so it can do fine where there's sort of dry shade in the summer. And then last but not least, in this moister area, I also have a plant that's quite a pride and joy, which is the California grape, Vitis californica. So that's something that we do water that. It rewards us by clambering over our trellis in the front and providing some summer shade and some grapes in the summer, which are much appreciated by particularly the western bluebirds that come and visit quite a bit. I know, what's not to like? Now we're going to talk about the birds that visit here in no particular order, but perhaps with a little commentary about them. We have regular Annis hummingbird visitors, and that's without a feeder. They just visit our flowers. You hear them year-round. We know they're here. And I just learned that they breed year-round in the Bay Area. So in the small bird range, we have oak titmice, which are really one of my favorites because they're so perky and have a lovely song. Ruby-crowned kinglets pass through here. They don't, as far as I know, they don't breed here, but they're, as of March, they're passing through right now. We have lesser goldfinches all year round, lots and lots and lots of them. And I know for a fact that they nest in some of our trees. House finches, very popular, very common. Dark-eyed juncos, they're here year-round. Song sparrows occasionally visit. Buick's wrens nest in this area. We have a couple of pairs that are regular here. White-breasted nuthatches are probably nesting here this year because we have a pair that regularly visits our feeder. White-crowned sparrows and golden-crowned sparrows are here during the winter. They eat my vegetation, and yet I welcome them. They will be moving on to northern areas to breed in the next month or so, and then the plants will be at peace. We have black-headed grosbeak in the neighborhood, but I have not seen them here. I've only heard them. They have a lovely call. With woodpeckers, we have 3 species. Downy woodpeckers are frequent visitors. We know that they also are permanent residents around here. The commonest woodpecker is Nuttall's woodpecker, very common. They visit our feeders. And then we have acorn woodpeckers in smaller numbers, but my hope is that our oak trees will get large enough that they will find them suitable for a granary tree, and then we'll get a family group here, but that's over time. Cedar waxwings are occasional visitors in the winter, and they really like our toyon berries. Western bluebirds are here mainly in the summer, although they are year-round residents, and they are especially fond of our California grapes. We just wait for the berries will ripen, and then after a while, here come the bluebirds, and they just come every day, and they're so clever with their little beaks. They take the berry, and then they sort of manipulate it a little bit, and then they spit out the skin, which is kind of tough, and then they spit out the seeds, and so you just have this kind of like sort of dusty sort of like residue. You just sweep it up, and they don't make a mess. They just eat the the fleshy insides. Robins, year-round, very common right now. We see a lot of them. California quail, we have known them to nest under our California fescues. I was only aware of it once, but I'm just hoping they'll be back, and we do see them regularly. Northern flicker, they eat our ants. Yes, we have band-tailed pigeons, and they have become a little more common in the last couple of years, and we see large flocks of them flying overhead, and then they come and visit our site, both for the feeder, and then they kind of poke around in the vegetation as well. And then, of course, the smaller mourning doves are here all the time. Western scrub jay, very common. They're the bad boys of the bird feeders, and they're here. We see them every day. Just recently, for the first time, we had a sighting of a red-breasted sapsucker, and the reason those were so late for us to become aware of is that they don't visit the feeders. They do forage on our trees, but they don't vocalize very much. They're very quiet and rather shy. We have both California towhees and spotted towhees. In the distance, we haven't actually seen these birds on our property, but we hope they're hunting for some of our voles. We have barn owls nearby and great horned owls. Several pairs of those in the neighborhood. We do have Cooper's hawks, and they do occasionally catch some of our songbirds, we think. Overhead, we do have a pair of red-tailed hawks that nest in the neighborhood. We have black phoebes. They forage for insects in our yard. Probably one of our commonest visitors, besides the lesser goldfinch. A very common visitor is the chestnut-backed chickadee. They're around all the time. We have yellow-rumped warblers passing through in the springtime. We occasionally have red-breasted nuthatches and also brown creepers. That's quite a few, isn't it?
Barbara, that was a beautiful video.
That was a beautiful video. So Rachel Steyer, thank you so much for making it. She did such a beautiful job. Barbara, I wonder if you could tell us maybe a little bit about maintenance of your garden.
Yes, we have a great sensitivity to the wishes of the fire marshal. And so when the grasses become dry, and this is mostly it's the stipa in the meadow, the first order of business when summer begins is to get out there and bring the grass down, because I don't want my native plant garden to attract attention, because everybody knows it's a native plant garden, and I just don't want people to associate it with fire danger. So I personally, I mean, one can go out there with a weed whacker and just, or even a mower set on high and mow it. I've been told. I've never done that. I spend a few hours. This is the one time of the year that I really get out there and do this, but I just get out there with a little Japanese knife. You know, it's like a little hand scythe, and cut the grass after it's shed its seed, and then I'm done for the year. So that's actually the most sort of sustained effort. I try to just bring dead material out for aesthetics, and that includes oaks, shrub residue, just for looks. I bring the soap plant, the snowberry down to a certain height, again, just for looks. And I do a lot of this with a little sort of regret, because I know that that wildlife, including insects, use all parts of plants, including the dead parts. But I feel a particular obligation to have the garden look. I mean, I like it looking wild, but I want people to like it looking beautiful, and so that means I'm making a trade-off between complete wildness and looks to satisfy people.
Once the leaves are off the grape, I prune it back to that knobby coppice looking look that you saw there for the winter. I don't know. I think that's about it. I'm compressing some months of sort of incidental pruning, but that's about it.
I like to leave dried stems and things in my yard. And what I used to do was when my mother would come to visit, I would cut them down before my mom came. So I would just hang on to them. I still have, dried Clarkia stalks in my yard in patches. So I guess we just have to manage our yards the way that we want to, but I go for the wild and woolly look more. Let's see. So how about watering? Did you talk much about like how do you manage the watering in your yard for
Yeah, I did not. My role model is Glenn Schneider, who doesn't water at all, but he lives in Berkeley and I live in a much hotter place. I water. Last year, we were worried that we might be restricted in water use, and in any event, we wanted to really keep our watering use down because of the drought. We water. You might have noticed that I have a number of sort of pet ferns that I keep in containers near the patio. And in part, that's because keeping them in containers and keeping them watered actually uses less water than if I put them in the ground. So I have a couple of pet chain ferns that require water frequently. And that's true to a lesser extent for some of the other potted ferns on the patio. We also water the grapevine some. I think we should water it less probably. And I'm experimenting because you'll see if you visit the garden, but there's a volunteer a pair of grapevines at the other end of the arbor that are complete volunteers. So I'm going to see how they do, which is probably growing more slowly, but with very little, if any, water. And what else? Last year, aside from a few things that had just been planted, we didn't water at all. And that was, I think, somewhat to the detriment of my coffee berries. But my goal is to have a really minimal water use garden, not completely free from watering.
Can you talk a little bit about Native Here Nursery and your involvement in your own genetically local native plant garden?
Oh goodness, yeah. Most of my plants were purchased from Native Here Nursery, and the reason being that it's a nursery that tells you where plants have come from. And my goal was to have not only exclusively plants that are native to the watershed, but actually to use plant materials that were sourced from the watershed. So some of that exchange involved me collecting seed, giving it to Native Here, and then they would grow it for me. I mean, their goal is to present to the public and for restorationists as broad a genetic diversity in their plant materials as possible. So I don't want to. I sometimes provide seed from plants that I've grown here, knowing that they're a little more genetically narrowed than collecting from a large population in the wild. But sometimes the plants we use are such in demand that we'd be better off to even utilize plants that are just one generation removed from wild stock. I will tell you that excuse me, I drink water. The California rose was not purchased from Native Here, so that identity problem was not theirs. But they are pretty careful to try and keep their identifications correct, and I'm working with the volunteers up there to do that.
Will you tell us a little bit about your green home features and what people might want to talk to you about if they come to visit your garden?
Yes. So our ultimate goal, of course, is to be zero net energy in the sense that we are generating as much energy as we use. And that's it's a process because we are adding features as we go along. And then sometimes we have to just hold for a moment and see what that change has created in our demand pattern. For example, in 2022, we replaced our very, very aged gas water heater and air conditioner with a heat pump. So that's going to be probably the largest single demand for electricity. And so we're just running that for a year or so to find out if our solar panel array is sufficient or how much more capacity we would need. As I think Kathy said at the beginning of this, the best thing we can all do, and we can do it right away, and it pays for itself, is to improve our insulation in our house. So that was the first thing we did. Since then, we've replaced some windows with better insulation. We've certainly put in weather stripping and that kind of thing, which is a super easy thing to do. Then in 2012, we installed solar panels, and 2013 we got a hybrid plug-in hybrid car. That'll eventually be replaced by a fully electric car. So I think that's about it. People are welcome to ask me. I'll have some facts and figures, but we're really happy with just feeling that we're doing our part for energy independence here.
All right. Well, Barbara, I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to thank Rachel Steyer. I know that she's watching, for making that video. It was such a beautiful video, isn't it?
Rachel is a really talented videographer. Yeah.
If you are watching today and haven't had a chance yet to make a donation, if you'll please support the tour. You can do it on the tour's website under Please Donate. You can Venmo a contribution to @Bringing Back the Natives. We depend upon donations to keep going, and we hope that if you've enjoyed our presentation, that you will help us to keep this event going.